Today we're going to be taking a look at all the games in the fourth mini-match between Magnus Carlsen and Ding Liren to see who would qualify to join Hikaru Nakamura in the finals of the Magnus Carlsen Chess Tour. A lot of you have been requesting, and I do read your comments, that I could start games from the very beginning rather than jumping in to a random position, and that's what we're going to try today. And then you'll let me know in the comments below if you think it goes too long or if you like the new format. So in the first game of the mini-match, Magnus Carlsen started out with d4, and we have a semi-Slav position. Very, very popular opening, very solid. Not something I recommend for beginners because the lack of space can sometimes be very difficult for black to navigate. Like normally I would recommend a reverse London or a Queen's Gambit, either decline variation with bishop e7, bishop b4, Rogozin, just to be a little bit more active. But nonetheless, it's a very aggressive system where white sacrifices a pawn on c4 to take full control of the center and basically just try to poke holes in black's position with moves like a4, h4, sometimes e5. Here Magnus plays bishop e2, and the move which is played over 4,000 times, bishop b7, Ding Liren doesn't play. Instead he plays b4, knight a4, and knight takes e4, getting a second pawn, but obviously completely negating his development. So all the pieces on the back rank, absolutely no progress to be made by any of them. And if he does, if he does make a trade knight for bishop, he's not going to have any more active pieces. So Hikaru, actually, he had joined the comments area with myself, as well as my good friend Alex Ostrovsky. Hikaru predicted that Ding Liren is only playing this because he had already prepared it. He must have for something really important like the candidates, because it's too dangerous of a position to enter otherwise. So bishop e5, knight back to f6, and now knight c5. And here Ding Liren kind of transforms the position into this, and plays bishop g7, and is ready to castle. And here Magnus decides not to take the pawn on c3, opting instead to delay his opponent's castling by playing the move queen a3. At this point, Ding Liren had 16 minutes on the clock, which means that he had gained a full minute of time from the original 15, and he was very well prepared, but now he started spending a lot of time and not really figuring out the best way to handle the position. So Ding sacrifices back the c5 pawn and the c3 pawn in order to stabilize the position, potentially put his bishop on c6, but now he's up no pawns, his kingside is overextended, and Magnus plays a very, very nice idea in a couple of moves after transferring the knight from e1 to c2, maybe out to d4. Here Magnus plays a very refined idea. He's already maximized the bishop and the knight and the rook and the queen. Pawn break for Magnus, super instructive. f3. Because normally you don't want to play this move. If you're subscribed to the school of thought of a grandmaster, we might all know, Ben Feingold, you're never going to play the move f3 because he told you not to do it. But actually in this position, f3 is the best move, because if you take, I'm actually going to throw in this capture so that the bishop stops guarding the pawn. And okay, you can check me, but I take. You cannot take because I will take your queen. Knight takes and rook here. And white is completely winning. Why is white completely winning? Because you don't have any defense for the king. I'm going to bring my second rook, bring this rook here, maybe drop my bishop back to cover this diagonal. And let's not forget that my queen can also join the party. So look for pawn breaks, especially if you have piece superiority on one side of the board. And here another instructive move from Ding Liren, g3. Now it looks like a mouse slip, but it's actually designed to give back the pawn but not open this side of the board. Material matters less in this position than activating white's pieces. Rook d8, a quick trade in queen e3, centralizing the queen, knight d4, and now another excellent pawn break to open up the position. Move g4. Fantastic move. And after rook c8, g5, queen f5, it's a very nice little tactical motif. Looks like this knight is simply lost. But after rook d4, queen c5, there's two things in danger. Now here, you can consolidate like this, but then if I play rook fd1, it looks like you're out of the woods, but then all of a sudden e5 comes out of nowhere. And there's no way for you to defend everything. I mean, if you drop the rook back, I take the queen, you take, and I take this guy. And then I probably take this guy unless you find the move bishop f1. But at that point, I'm not really trusting that you're going to find anything. And even if you do find bishop f1, the second rook comes and you're just going to lose. So here, Magnus has to find a very nice counter shot. Bishop takes e6. And now black can't just take the rook, because after the trade, I'm going to win your rook and I'm going to be up a piece. So Ding found the nice move rook c6. And after rook e4, a simplification happens, and Magnus transfers his rook to the outpost on e5 to defend the g5 pawn, block e6, and always have access like this. And Magnus won this pretty effortlessly. He brought up all his pieces, pawns, king, and Ding played the move h4, but it simply doesn't work. You take it, g6, rook d8, and now you use the boxing out of the king to force this king to the e file and king g5. e5 and g7, and the king, the pawn, and this rook coming down are way too advanced. If rook g8, just king, king, rook f8, etc. Black does not have enough counterplay, and Magnus Carlsen struck first. In the second game, well, Magnus Carlsen had the black pieces, and well, what do you do when you're up 2-1 in a mini match and you're up 1-0? Correct, you play the King's Indian defense. No, you really shouldn't be playing the King's Indian defense, because at this level, the Super GM level, we know that white gets pretty good winning chances. Magnus plays a very flexible setup, but a subpar setup. Ding Liren plays very, very actively. He plays a3 and b4, or I guess always creating the threat of a3, b4, trying to not allow something to go to c5. Magnus plays the thematic move f5, but Ding takes and plays queen c2. And with the knight outflanking on h4, hitting these squares, not allowing this knight to get here, not allowing the queen any access, white is just crushing here. Knight f6, now he plays b4, again playing on both sides of the board, and finds a very thematic King's Indian breakthrough. If you're looking how to shatter the King's Indian, c5. This breaks the structure, because if all this happens, you're going to take on e5 at the end of it. Just to show you what that looks like. There's certain tactics with this bishop, but it just doesn't matter. This is not what a King's Indian player wants. A King's Indian player only wants one thing. You know? They only want one thing. That's to attack the king. And so after c5, well, Magnus unfortunately had to allow this c6. And now the thumbnail of the entire video arrives. Remember that really good pawn break last game? The same pawn break that exists in this position. f3. You activate all of white's pieces, which is one of the reasons you can never say something like never play f3. It's good rule for beginners, but for intermediate players, they do have to look for pawn breaks. f3 played, and now pandemonium breaks loose on the board. It looks like black is going to win material, but let me tell you something about this rook on b1. This rook is damn brave, because that rook survives on b1 for the next 10 moves. Bishop takes h6, a thunderbolt move. Bishop takes h6, and you cannot take that bishop back for free, because I'm going to play queen takes knight, and I'm going to be threatening all sorts of nasty stuff on these diagonals. So Magnus plays queen f6, and now Ding Liren finds a glorious combination. I can pause here and think if you'd like. I'm going to give you 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 3, 2, and 1. And before everybody starts accusing me of copying a God Mator, just know that he's awesome. And we're friends. We've actually played 4-player chess. Just thought I'd throw that nugget of information in there. So hopefully that's not going to be one of these stupid comments that gets pinned this video. Bishop h7 check, king h8, and now the only move that wins. You need to enable the move knight g6. You can't because the bishop is there, so just take it. It's one of those rare cases where you literally get rid of your problems by bulldozing them. If you ever have a house that needs to be demolished, you can play rook takes bishop. How does that move make sense? Well, now you play knight g6, and you're like, yeah, but Levy, what about this? King could just take the bishop. I know, and for a moment, Magnus has a 4-point advantage. Double check, the most forcing move in the game. Knight f8 check, king takes. And Magnus Carlsen, I think voluntarily here for the beauty of the game, walks into checkmate. He said in the post-match interview that he missed it. Check, king g5, and now a beautiful mating sequence. Queen h4 check, king f5, and checkmate on the board. The knight from f8 covers both squares, and the king's got no escape. And the match is level at 1-1. In the third game, Magnus decided to stabilize. It was not much of an exciting game, actually. This is one of the games that I'm not going to feature a lot of. It was a queenless middle game, so pretty boring. Pawn structure, very, very stable. I'm actually going to skip a lot of the middle game. I'm sorry, you can rewatch the game elsewhere. It wasn't particularly exciting. But it did end up in an endgame where Ding Liren was the one pushing. He had the knight versus the bishop, and in endgames where you have knight versus bishop, you need piece activity. And here we actually see a very thematic concept. Since white has the light squared bishop, white is more dominant on the light squares. So if black just makes a dark squared bind, all these pieces are on the dark square of that row, then white is going to struggle. White can't get in with the king, and this knight and this pawn create a barrier of entry on this side of the board. So a very, very interesting endgame that took place, but ultimately resulted in this, and this is simply a draw. So I think Magnus just wanted to stabilize in game 3 and relax for a second. In game 4, Ding Liren had the white pieces and was immediately pressuring. Magnus played a very early c5, trying to make the game a Benoni. dc5, queen a5 check. Already the game is basically out of theory after this move. Ding Liren sacrifices the c4 pawn, and Magnus just doesn't take it. He plays queen a5. If you're a beginner watching and you see the world champion playing like this, don't play like this, all right? When you know all the rules, you know how to break all the rules. And a very weird middle game happened, but it kind of became, and I'm just playing through the moves here quickly because they're not extremely important. The middle game became like a Maroczy bind, because think about it, black played the c-pawn, right? So the c-pawn is gone, and white's d-pawn is gone. And all white has to do is play e4, and it's kind of like a Sicilian. If that doesn't make sense to you, e4, c5, normally in the open Sicilian, you trade the d for the c-pawn. And so that's why it's good to have information about pawn structures, because maybe you don't know the opening, but the pawn structure overlaps opening to opening. Anyway, over the course of the middle game, Magnus was under a lot of pressure. He had certain weaknesses to deal with, but he simplified and he stabilized, and he ended up drawing this game, spoiler alert, by trading white's active pieces and cocooning, which is a very legitimate defensive strategy. Look at this. The cocoon, queen and rook, like this, just covering up. Like, Adesanya, Yoel Romero, not to bring up bad memories for MMA fans. A lot of references in this video. And then, again, creating a very nice defensive fortress. Bringing the king, the knight, and the rook. Another very instructive game because it's playing against the light squared bishop. Now the situation is flipped. And here it looks like this pawn is going to be lost after king d6. But because of rook d1 check always on the board, king has to go back to guard the knight. The players just repeated. And we go to a blitz. First game of the blitz, Magnus, with the white pieces, busts out the London, which is weird considering the Armageddon did not go so well for him, but it is what it is. And then as early as move 8, we already have some sort of theory, very, very aggressive line. Ding Liren goes for bishop g7. It's theory that's almost never been played, so very cool to see the super GMs kind of paving the path of London theory. Did play a match recently against Eric Rosen in the London, so we will be taking notes. And around here, like around move 17, Magnus Carlsen sacrificed an exchange. He did not blunder an exchange, he actually sacrificed an exchange. And he did that because his knights provide a really, really powerful blockade, and black's got very passive pieces. But Ding consolidated beautifully. He found a way to activate his rook, he found a way to activate his bishop, and his king. And then he tried to trade off Magnus Carlsen's rook. He was successful in doing so, because now Magnus only has 2 knights. You're never going to beat a guy with just 2 knights like this, just because 2 knights are powerful, but rook and bishop are more powerful. But Magnus did find a way to bring all his pawns forward, but yeah, once, the initiative ran out, the players were low on time, they just repeated, which I guess is what happens at Super GM level. You play an opening that doesn't really win by force like the London system. It takes us to the final game of the Blitz, where Ding Liren had the white pieces, and the game began with, again, something relatively boring and straightforward, which is a Catalan. And if anybody wants to know about the Catalan, I actually recently made a video on the Catalan system, this kind of system with white, d4, c4, and then the kingside fianchetto, but relatively straightforward, relatively boring system. And I'm actually going to jump as far as move 25. Again, you might not like it, but I cannot take you move by move through the entire game. I don't want to make this video 30 minutes for no reason. Instead, we'll just do 15. So, Magnus played queen b7 here, which is simply a blunder. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to pause it and think about it, so that I don't spoil your answer. Nobody goes, Levy, you're going too fast. You need to slow down. I do read your comments, so I try to implement your criticism and feedback. Except those of you that just insult me. Those comments I just pin. So bishop takes a5 is the move. Because if knight takes a5, oh, that wasn't the move played in the game, but if knight takes a5, now white jumps in with rook c7, destroying everything, winning back the bishop, and the passed a-pawn will be decisive. So, bishop g5 played. Bishop b6, bishop c1, bishop c5, rook shuffles. a trade, and a capture on c1. And at this point, if you plug it into the engine, it's saying that white is completely winning. That Ding Liren looked like he was going to win the game, win the second blitz game, win the match, and make it a 5-round endeavor. And then here, Ding blundered horribly by playing the move knight c3. Excuse me, not here. All that suspense. Here, Ding blundered horribly. Pause, take two. Here, Ding blundered horribly, thinking that he was going to escape with his king out to h2, and blundering a gorgeous geometric motif. Again, you can pause it here. Okay, I'm going to show you the move. Queen a8, and there is no way to stop rook a1. Look at how big the board is. This is the biggest triangle tactic on the entire board. It's the fact that you cannot prevent rook a1 and you cannot prevent damage on h1 from happening. And so here, Ding had to scramble. Essentially had to give away his knight or his bishop. He chose to give away his bishop. Magnus went back, but here Ding did have a chance to stabilize. I mean, if you get an endgame that's knight in 3 versus rook in 3, you can draw it. It's not the end of the world, especially if the pawns are all on the same side. FGH versus FGH. Black has a passed a pawn. It's just knight e2, rook d8, knight f4. But then disaster struck again for Ding Liren, and even though Magnus lost the battle of game 2 by checkmate, he won the battle of game 6 by checkmate. Queen e4, king h3, too many light squared weaknesses, rook b1, threatening this, and Ding Liren, tragically, walks into checkmate by playing the move king g4. Black to move, checkmate in 2, pawn f5 check, and that's actually it. Because if you play king h4, this is still mate. Knight cannot block because of the pin. And if you play king h3, that's mate, and that's mate. What Ding should have played was queen c8, followed by king g4. The difference being that here f5 is impossible. This is why you should always look at least to potentially throw in a check, because you never know, it might actually save you. That's the difference, is that the queen from c8 actually covers the f5 square. I'm not saying that I would have found it, but what I am saying is that as far as this game goes, maybe that's what he had overlooked. It was a move order thing and he had to put his king on g4. And Magnus Carlsen wins this match and sets up a final, the final that we all expected. I'm not sure we all deserved it. Magnus Carlsen versus Hikaru Nakamura, the winner of which will get $140,000, the loser of which will still be guaranteed $80,000. But this is the matchup that we all want. I mean, they played a playoff in the World Blitz Championship. When it comes to Rapid and Blitz, I'm not sure there is a bigger challenger to Magnus Carlsen than Hikaru. This is a rivalry we all want to see. And in my opinion, these two are the biggest global ambassadors of the game of chess. The world champion himself and everything that Hikaru is doing. But I actually don't know who is 3rd, 4th, and 5th on that list. A lot of you, obviously, those watching from India, big fans of Vishy Anand. He is a generational talent, and he has pushed the game in directions you would not imagine in a country like India. But on a global level, who maybe besides those three? Is it Kasparov? Well, who is it? Let me know in the comments below. Give the video a like if you haven't already. Maybe share it with a friend. And there's a lot of useful links in the description as always, like the Discord. Almost have 5,000 members. I keep plugging it because so many people keep joining, as well as some of my openings courses. All right, take a look at some of the other videos on the left side. That side, sorry. And I'll see you in the next video.